welcome back to Rupert and Pinchy. That's George, also known as Rupert. I'm Isaiah, also known as Pinchy. Our goal here is to jump off the spinning scroll cage of doom and instead put our efforts towards aiming to the good and the truth. And so that is our main goal here. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the nature of good and evil. So there's been a lot of literature on this in the past. I mean, obviously, it's really important, and that's why that would be. But yeah, we're not going to go everywhere that we can with this because we only have a limited amount of time. So if you want to have further research, you're going to have to look at it on your own. So the reason why we want to discuss this today is so that we can get a better grasp of what natural law is and what virtue is, which we'll get into in some future episodes. So that's kind of what we want to do. I think, first of all, I want to point out the weaknesses of some other views of good and evil before we move on to what we believe good and evil is, and so I want to start with that. So one that comes to my mind that we might want to start with is the balance theory, or the yin and yang. Basically, the idea is that there's two forces, and that they, in order to maintain balance in the universe, there has to be a balance in the universe of good and evil, if that makes sense. And that we want to keep those two things, like, equal in the world. And so, that's the first view I want to discuss. What do you think the main issues with this are? And what do you think some of the strengths are that we need to acknowledge?
The strength is easy because it's singular. It's just identifying that there's something bad and something good.
Right.
So that's a good place to start.
Right.
If you start off with everything's all good or everything's all bad, that would be incorrect. So so that's the good thing. So what is the negative side? And we've covered that in a couple different episodes in a different way, but we come from the Judeo-Christian perspective, and we believe and profess a creator. And so when we look at the scriptures, we see that God is good, and then we see God himself saying everything he created was good.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't see anywhere in the scriptures that God said, okay, I made a good world. Now it's important for me to make a bad world so that we have we have a balance, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really big problem. And then, I mean, it would indicate that there would have to be two gods if good and evil existed in that way, because there has to be one side has to be equivalent to the other side. So either that or God's on both sides, which doesn't make sense, I don't think. Right?
It's interiorly disconnected or what's the word? Incongruent. What I mean by that is, if you're going to take the yin and yang side and say that's a spiritual thing,
mm-hmm.
If you look at it closer, it's a very materialistic concept. It's a very mechanical concept. It's really a tyranny that a person doesn't have a choice. And so that's other, I guess from an ascetic standpoint, that's a very disconcerting position.
I have another view on it too.
Position. Yeah, go ahead.
The thing is, that would also indicate that there's, obviously, if both sides are equal, then that means that we could be on either side, and that would be considered all right for us to be on that side. Which it seems a little odd. It would be good to be evil. That doesn't really seem like a very that doesn't really seem to make sense. It's kind of contradictory in a way. But yeah, I mean that just can't be. There's not equivalence on both sides, and I think there's a really big problem if you say that good and evil are equivalent. It's like that's really dangerous. That means then you could be as evil as you wanted to be, and you would still be righteous in a way, because it's okay to be on both sides.
Absolutely. It's actually the yin and yang is actually saying they balance each other out like two kids on a I was going to say two kids on a jigsaw, but that's not really
That's not going
a
to work very
seesaw.
well.
No, that would be painful. No, but two kids on a seesaw, they're balancing out. And so in that situation, it shows you obviously that kid on the right side is equal to the kid on the other side. Good or bad, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a negativity because it's not distinguishing between good and evil. And we think that's somewhat, that idea that we believe is somewhat self-evident, which we'll get into later. The other thing that's really bad about the yin and yang, and actually is that it's a very despairing, pointless, and sad concept, because that means that for eternity, good and evil are fighting one another in an endless battle that is only always equal, always destructive,
Right.
and never creative.
Right. There's no resolution ultimately with that conflict, and so it's like it's a very. I don't think it's a very good idea.
Well, so you mentioned an excellent word, resolution. What do you and I feel when we're in a discussion about a term or an idea, and we're coming from maybe not opposite positions, but different positions?
Yeah.
We're struggling. We're not in comfort. We're not in joy or happiness when we're in that
Right.
different positions.
It
But
would
when
not be worth it if there was no resolution.
yeah, but when we come to a resolution, whether or not it's your view was being more accurate or my view being more accurate, we don't care.
Right.
We don't deal in my view and your view. We try not to.
Right.
We can't help to a certain point, none of us can help. So anyway, I think you just bring up a very simple, but really resolution is one of the joys that we have as human beings.
Well, I think
Right?
this goes back to something that I thought is really interesting. Israel means to struggle with God. And so part of that struggle is there has to be a resolution, otherwise it's not worth it. I mean, it's like, oh, well, there's a God. Yeah, that's not how life works. It's like, well, if there's a God, then there's something that there's some moral law, or there's some things that he has in store for us. And so it's like, to struggle with God and to not have a resolution is kind of sad. It's like we struggle with understanding God so that we can know God more, so we can love God more. And so I think that's also interesting, is we are, it's not, I don't think it's an entirely negative thing to say that Israel was just a struggle with God. I think we got to go through that. We got to struggle with God.
Right. Well, and that's where maybe someone would go like, "Oh, okay, see, that's kind of a yin and yang flavor." It's like,
We're not equal to God. I'll just tell you.
well, right, but you see where that yin and yang idea could be thought of. But as you look closer and you start to think more clearly and more maturely and with some logic, you realize, okay, is God really striving with Israel? Or is it actually Israel doing the striving?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so God isn't striving to become more like Israel.
Right.
But it would seem when we read the scriptures, it's like, oh, it seems like God is striving. It's like we're human. He's communicating us in a human, so that we can understand what he's talking about. He says, like you said many times, it's like, okay, he stretched the heavens with his hands. It's like, okay,
does he have hands?
Does he have hands?
No.
Okay, so I don't mean to get off the subject.
Oh yeah, don't worry about it. And then, another view.
Okay, so that's
that's
the yin and yang. That's the yin and yang.
Yeah, and then there's another view that's very similar to that. I mean, it ends up having to be very similar, which is the idea that evil is like a real property of some kind in the world. And so the biggest problem with that is, if we're taking this from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, God cannot be the author of evil. Otherwise, evil would be good, which doesn't make any sense. It contradicts what good is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, it's a contradictory term, so it's like it. God can't really create a property that's evil.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it would be good because God created it, and so it's like that. That doesn't really work because it's kind of like that equivalence thing, like we were talking about with the view of the balance. It's not really a balance, but God created both. He would have to create both. I
Mm-hmm.
think that one's pretty self-explanatory. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that one.
No, it's. I do have some thoughts after you finish the. Maybe if you have one more that you're going to, but it sounds very similar to yin and yang, doesn't it?
Right, like both sides, like they're both properties. Um, yeah. Well, what do you mean exactly? Because I did say that, but
No, I
in
agree with
what
you.
way
It
is it?
does.
Yeah.
Well, they don't go. Yin and yang has the idea of equal and opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The real property that you mentioned doesn't really say equal and opposite.
Right.
It's just like God needed 10% or created 20% bad so that he could, whatever. So it's not exactly the same, but in the final analysis, it's the same. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so
Well, do you think that view, um, the reason why God would have to create evil is because if it was a real thing, somebody would have to create it.
right.
Because it's a created property. That's what a property is. It's a created thing that certain things function that way,
Yeah,
right?
those who have those positions would say it was created. Yep.
Right. So it would have to be created, but it doesn't really make sense that it doesn't work in Christianity at least. Um, and so with those ones, I don't really have another theory on my mind other than what is the true what is the true relationship between good and evil, and I think that's what I want to go into next. And I think one thing that I
Can
want
I
to,
say one thing first?
yeah, sure.
Um, what I find interesting is that most of the time, not all the time, but with truth, most of the time, the truth is simple.
Mm-hmm.
And we've said in another podcast, and we probably could say here, that truth is simple, right? But sometimes it doesn't seem simple. So I don't want to just say, that because when you talk about the incarnation, for example, and you explain to someone what that means and what we believe that means, once you start explaining it, you
Mm-hmm.
realize, wow, this seems complicated. But it's kind of like once you understand it, it's like, oh, that's simple. Why didn't I see that
Mm-hmm.
before? So when I'm thinking about these different views so sometimes when a person presents one or more options to you of a principle or a concept, um, a lot of times it'll be the simple one that's right.
Well, yeah, I think that typically the way that theories work is if it's simple, that one's probably more accurate than the complex one. Um, you don't need to make it complex if it doesn't have to be. Is the idea.
Right.
So if you have a simple answer, that one's probably more correct. I mean, that's not always true, but
It's
like
not always true, but
when we imagine miracles, like oh, God must have spoken to them in a dream. It's like, well, sometimes that happens, right? But
mm,
we shouldn't always assume that. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a normal dream. But there are some indications of whether or not it was given by God. But like, I think people want to hear from God, and so sometimes they read into things when they shouldn't. And
hmm
so that's kind of a way of life of how the world works. Is typically the simple answer makes more sense.
yeah, and so and you were talking about dreams or visions, and like, yeah, God gives dreams and visions. And it's good that people would expect that God could do that.
Right.
But not every dream and vision is a dream and vision from the Lord.
Right.
It could be pizza, it could be magic mushrooms. So
Hopefully, it's not magic mushrooms.
but if they're not magic, what would they be? Non-magic mushrooms? Anyway, so those won't give any dreams. But I can't say from a fact that I cannot say from experience that that is true. Thank God I have been spared some things. Anyway, so coming back to your simplicity thing again. So when you hear, I think when you hear our explanation, when Zeke goes into it, you're going to go like, oh, wow, that's kind of simple.
Hmm.
I never thought about that before. And at first you might go like, oh, no, that's not right. But what's really cool, I love it when this happens. And this happens a lot in God, is when you see something that's true, it's simple. And you're like, oh, I'm so glad it's simple because guess what? I'm simple. So anyway, go
Well,
ahead.
do you think man tries to make things more complex than they are?
Well, you know the answer to that.
Many times I
Yeah.
do. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like
You.
the cool, more, what would it be, in-depth answer. I think that's why people love the idea of aliens, is because it's like they're like complex creatures of some kind
Yeah.
that live in a galaxy far, far away, and so it's like it just piques the interest of people because it's like it's a weird concept that you can go in depth and be like, oh, the spaceships and then all this stuff, and they found Earth, and this is what they're doing here. It becomes a complex web of things that are just so unnecessary. It's like, man,
Yeah.
first of all, we don't know that aliens exist. I don't think aliens exist, but this is just an entire view that has no basis. And so I
Yeah.
think many
It's
times that happens with complex things is people think it's cool if it's super complex. But sometimes it's even more cool and awe-inspiring if it's simple. I mean,
right.
honestly, it
Yeah.
makes me realize the goodness of God to see how the world works, the way that He designed it, and that it's a lot of it is simple. And so I do want to go into the view that it honestly is more simple than the other ones.
So
And
the
right.
so the keep going on that after a minute. So when you were talking there, it just reminds me of when Jesus says, "Lord, I thank thee that you revealed these things to the simple." Now, it just has occurred to me as I'm saying this right now. He revealed it to the simple.
Hmm.
That means the simple understood it. So if I reveal Einstein's theory of relativity, even to myself, but if I knew it and understood it and I revealed it to my neighbor, and let's just say I'm not picking on my neighbor, let's say they're simple. They're not going to know what I
No,
did
they're
to say.
not going to know.
Right? But here God is saying, I thank thee that you have revealed these things to the simple.
Hmm.
They understood him because they accepted him. And the scripture talks about becoming like a little child, right? So then when you talked about, well, why would someone want to have the secret knowledge? And I think, it's power and money, or power, money, and pride, which those all go together a lot of times. So I'm thinking of, there's basically two types of persons then. It's the givers or the sharers as one, the hoarders or the keepers. So, that old saying that teach a man how to fish and he'll, feed himself for the rest of his life.
No, I mean,
The the
yeah.
the keeper, the keeper and the hoarder is going to go like, I'm not going to teach him how to fish. I'm going to tell him it's very, very complicated. You put a worm on a hook. You put the hook in the water. The fish grabs the hook. You pull it up, and then you eat the fish. We
Wow,
can't
that's
let
really
them.
difficult.
Yeah, we can't let them know that. So we used to call it in every industry, whether you're talking a financial industry, a a mechanical industry or industrial industry, we called them the keepers of the secret knowledge. You know, so just as a side note, that's why there's a certain tendency to be the keeper of the secret knowledge for
Right, we want to
power,
create these
leverage. Yeah.
complex systems, and many times we just don't need it. And I think
Okay.
that's really
So,
how modern science looks at things. Many times is
yep.
they're like, we know about quantum particles. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow, it's so in depth, and people just don't know what they're talking about because we're not. First of all, we're not in those fields of science. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even if they did tell us something that was simple in their science, it would be complicated. But there's many times where they just make things unnecessarily complicated. Yeah. So I think that's a good point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think God is simple by his nature. What I mean by
Mm-hmm.
that is he's not made up of parts. He's one God, and he is simple. He simply is. And so, of course, what he's going to reveal is going to be more simple than we would otherwise think. And so, let's think about this. God is good, and God didn't create evil. We've indicated that. So,
Mm-hmm.
how can evil exist?
Well, let's start with the first thing, and that would be the creator. And so we'd start with goodness. So we'd have to define what is good.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. And right. And so the simple and most true definition, although we're going to give others, and actually, this most true definition is also confirmed by what the other definitions that we're going to give. But the most true definition is God. So if someone said define good, if you answered God, you would be correct. That'd be the right answer.
Right, and if you said
Uh,
justice and you said other things, then you would say God. But yeah.
yeah. So God. So then from there, I would go to that uh, good is a thing or a thought that promotes the proper end of a thing. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Or is
I
that
mean,
convoluted?
a very similar way to put it would be, which I have right here, is that which best fits its own design. Right.
Okay.
Is that kind of what you were
So,
saying, or it was a little
yeah, really.
convoluted?
Yeah. In that, so that, yeah, no, we're saying the same thing. So if God designed the devil to be evil, then that would be good because he's fulfilling
His
his
design, right? Exactly.
right. So,
But it
but
can't
we know
be.
that's not. But we know that's not the case. And someone will say, "Well, you haven't shown me why that's not the case yet." Well, we're laying our groundwork. So okay. So what do you mean by your definition?
Well,
You know,
so
give me an example.
I think this goes all the way up to the angelic kingdom when understanding what goodness is, but on a biological level, we can see how this is true. And by giving any example that we can think of, I honestly think best fits this definition, which means that it's a good definition. And that's how it works in the world. Is if the definition best fits what we're talking about, then it's probably a good definition. So
It's
I mean,
probably the right one.
that's it. That's something I haven't actually thought about. Is we consider a good definition that which best suits the word. And so, in a similar way, we could talk about like trees, for instance. A tree has a specific design. It's supposed to ground itself with roots. It's supposed to grow tall. I mean, depending on what tree it is. It's supposed to grow a
Unless it's a
strong
bonsai
trunk.
tree.
Right. And if
Go
it's a
ahead.
bonsai tree, you can basically make it however you want it to be. Um,
Right.
but a tree is supposed to typically sink roots into the ground, grow a strong trunk, grow leaves so that it can get energy, roots so that it can get energy from the soil, from the water. And so, what happens when it doesn't do that? When it doesn't stay up because it didn't create a strong enough roots in the ground? If it gets destroyed by lightning or something, it breaks down. So, what do we consider that? We consider there's a defect in it of some kind if it doesn't root its trees and it doesn't last very long. And so we would consider a good tree that which lasts longer or that which
Mm-hmm.
best fits what it's designed for. All right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there's any example we give, um, we can see that we typically, in reference to what is good, it's what best fits what it's supposed to be. And then when we consider something worse off or bad, a bad definition, let's say, it doesn't fit
Mm-hmm.
the way that it's supposed to. And so,
It's lacking something.
right, absolutely. And so, just like we're talking about in words and in the physical realm, what makes us different than the
Mm-hmm.
animals? What capacities do we have that we're supposed to fulfill as
Mm-hmm.
humanity, as humans, right? And that's where
Right.
we get into morality.
Right.
You can't really blame trees for being bad trees, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where we end up is how does that correlate to humans, right?
Right. So let me give a funny example, if I may, and then you continue
Yeah,
on.
you can do that.
It occurred to me as you were saying that there was a time when I was attending college, and I was in I can't remember what biology course I was in, but it was a higher level biology course, and I wasn't studied up, and we had a test, and so there was four questions, and they weren't it was a what are those called? It's not
Multiple
multiple choice.
choice?
What's the
Oh,
word? No.
essay?
What's the other one?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, essay. And so on one of the questions, I absolutely knew not the answer, but I wrote 3 pages. 3 pages. And because I knew a lot of terminology, and as if my professor was not very bright or something. So then when I got that score back on that test, it wasn't good, by the way, but it didn't matter the number of words that I had on those pages. He said something was missing. The right words.
Yeah, right, right.
So it wasn't that I gave him anything. He would have easily said, if you had turned in 3 blank pages for that answer to question number 3, that would have been exactly what you gave me with all those words.
Right.
You lacked something.
That
Anyway,
was
I
supposed to
just
be
remember
there.
that back and I think, oh, that was, you know what? I will be honest with you and I'll be humble. On that test, I got a D minus. And you know what?
Wow, you did better than you should have.
I was just going to say, he was very gracious.
Yeah.
I think the only reason he gave me a D minus and not an F, that was on that test. I didn't get a D minus on in the course, but I think the only reason he gave me a D minus because he was like, well, he did write a lot, so he tried
Yeah,
something,
he
even though
tried. He was sincere.
yeah, even though he was trying to BS me because he knew that I wasn't really sincere.
Right, right,
But
right.
anyway,
Right. Well,
so it was something lacking.
right, absolutely. And I think a good way that we can picture this is okay, does nothing exist? What I mean by that is nothing an actual property?
Right.
It's not. I mean, when we always think of like there's something and then there's empty space is the opposite of that. But
Mm-hmm.
nothing is not actually a real property. And so,
Right.
just in the same way, we can still say that nothing is like a term that we use, and that it is something when it comes to language, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
actually something, right? Because that
Mm-hmm.
just contradicts itself. So, I think that that's a way that we can put it when it comes to evil is evil isn't like a real property, but it's still we can still use the word because we're using the word to explain a concept, not necessarily to explain a thing that actually is physically there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and you would know better about this because you just got out of 6th grade, graduated, and
Sixth grade is graduation? What are you talking about?
well, okay, yeah, but you after 5 times you got it. So 5 tries. No, but zero. Even the what we call number, is that considered a real number?
No.
And wasn't there in the world, wasn't some civilizations didn't even have that as a quote number?
Right, because it's just nothing.
Right. Yeah, which is really weird because if Joe went and said, "Hey, I would like to buy 3 goats from you." I don't know who would be Joe, but that's kind of a Middle Eastern Palestinian name. And then if he was asking Steve, "Hey, Steve, I'd like to buy 3 goats from you," and Steve would go like, "Well, I don't have. I have. Um, I I don't have 3 goats." Okay, then what do you have? Well, I don't have 3, and I do you have 2? No, I don't have 2. Do you have 1 goat? No, I don't have 1 goat. So then you have not 3 goats, right? It was a lot easier to come up with 0, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
that okay, so
It's a placeholder for something that isn't there, which is
right,
odd.
yeah, but it's so important, right? For
Right,
the concept.
right.
So
Absolutely.
of having it's so important because then it shows us how infinitely greater one is. It's the number 1. The
Right.
quantity 1 compared to the quantity 0
It's
is
infinite.
infinitely greater.
Absolutely. That's a good point. And so when we correlate to humanity is we seem to have a different capacity than an animal doesn't. And that's morality in our lives. I mean, people
Hmm.
make decisions. I
Right.
can decide um, to make the wrong choice in certain
Hmm.
instances. And so when it comes to morality, you can't blame a tree. Like I said, you can't blame a tree for not growing its roots. You can only blame free will agents, ones that actually decide to do the wrong thing, to break God's
Hmm.
law. And so that's how evil can exist when it doesn't exist. Like I said, it does exist in a way. Um, is when we just don't fit God's design and we do it on purpose.
Hmm.
And so I have a summary of that right here that I got from another video, which I thought was really interesting. Is a human is a being aspiring to perfection, not only on the physical or biological level, like a cheetah would,
Hmm.
but also on the spiritual level. So that's one thing that makes us different is that there are spiritual consequences, and we're also spiritual creatures. So it's like it's a little bit different.
Hmm.
So we're speaking in an analogical sense. Just
Hmm.
like there's a good cheetah, or the good in a cheetah can
Or
be
a good
compared
tree.
to, yeah, absolutely, a good of a tree can be compared to the good of free will agents like humans or angels, right?
Hmm.
It's just it's analogical. Like I said, we can't blame the tree, but we can blame humans, and so I think that's one of the things that makes us quite different from animals.
Right.
And one of the specific differences that humanity has. And so I think that ultimately um, is the case when it comes to any example you give. Not bad is always a lack.
Hmm. So and this will and we probably will be finishing up here in just a few minutes because the point we want to get to is we're coming right to it. And is that it would seem if and let's just take one like you said, everything we would expect a cheetah to have spots.
Mm,
We'd expect a cheetah to have 4 legs. We'd expect a tree, if it's an apple tree, to produce apples, or a fig tree to produce figs. Okay, so in the moral sense, we would expect a human to have goodness. And so let's just use one virtue, and then you take it. Um, uh, take it over wherever you want to go. But if we think about justice, if we define justice as giving to each his due, we would
we
say
can
that a
agree with
good
that
man,
definition.
yeah, yeah, uh, uh,
Inside joke. Sorry. Keep going.
yeah, it's like so. If we were to say that, so then a good man would have justice. So then we would say then an evil man would not have something else, but he would lack
Right.
justice, right?
Right. Injustice is just lacking justice.
Right. And so so what you're saying then, Z, is it's called the deprivation um, theory,
Or privation
and
theory.
or private. Oh, it's actually privation. Deprivation means that you're deprived of hearing my lovely voice every morning.
I'm sure
That
that's
would
what it
be
means. Okay, keep going.
that would probably mean joy. But anyway, but no, it's privation. You're absolutely right. It's privation. I just like saying deprivation. It makes me sound smarter. Um,
Well, privation also sounds smart.
or dumber. But yeah, so anyway, so what you're saying then is that evil, the best way we can define it is not that it's a thing.
Right.
It's like that zero. The difference between 0 and 1, it's a lack. So then when you start to see that, or if you believe that, then the question comes, well, yeah, but wouldn't we say then, I would ask, I'll punt this back to you. So then is the devil evil?
Well, I mean, we can call certain people evil, right? And so, I mean, when it comes to angels, we could say the same thing, couldn't we?
Well, I mean, he talks about the wicked. But for sure with angels, we can say that, the devil is evil. But even with the devil, why would we call him evil?
Well, because it doesn't
But
fit his design.
doesn't fit his design, and he lacks humility.
Right, he's not supposed to be a liar, first of all.
Right.
And then he's not supposed to have pride, and so it's like, I mean, if pride is a real thing. And all this gets confusing when we say that, well, evil's not real. It's like, well, that's not what we're... I'm sorry.
No, that's yeah.
It just gets confusing because it's like, if somebody just heard us say that evil didn't exist, they'd be like, oh, so they don't believe anything that anybody does is bad. It's like,
Right.
that's when it just gets confusing sometimes. That's all I was saying.
Right. We can see the results of evil. Right. So if I'm a man and I'm supposed to be
I think you are, probably.
honest, yeah. I'm supposed to be honest. Well, and let's say I'm operating always dishonestly. I'm still a man,
Right.
but my dishonesty it doesn't add anything. It's going to rob me of anything. It's going to rob anybody I'm dealing with. And the reason I'm dishonest is not because I have this gooey stuff called dishonesty.
Right.
It's because I lack
what I should have.
Honesty.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with the devil, in his essence, or you know this better, but God made all angels good. So in a sense, the angels are good, but he has chosen to fall by giving up something, giving up humility.
Right.
He didn't take anything on. He didn't go like shopping that day and go like, hey, I'm going to go up to the celestial heaven store and I'm going to buy me some pride and some envy. It's like, no, it was a result.
Right. Well, I think
of giving the humility away.
I just had a thought.
Go ahead.
Is pride a lack of justice? The reason why I say that is because the idea of pride is I give honor to myself that I am not due.
It's okay. So, and we're getting, and you can see why we're going to eventually down the road get into virtues, because it helps you understand this. It definitely is a part of it, and so maybe it's completely it, and we'd have to think.
Right. Well, I'm just saying there's an honor that we are supposed to give to God, and we don't lack that honor to God. Or I mean, we lack that honor when we have pride, right? And we honor ourselves to a degree that only God is supposed to be honored, if that makes sense.
Right. So, maybe the opposite of pride is humility. And I think I agree with you that justice, it would apply, because you are to give justice to yourself. And part of giving justice to yourself is honestly assessing yourself and rendering to you your due.
Right. And the only reason I bring that up is to clarify how pride is a lack, because it's a lack of that proper honor. And so that's why I'm pointing that out, is because people would be like, well, pride isn't like a lack of something, but it is. It's a lack of the proper view of yourself. You lack the proper view of yourself. It's not like you have an additional view. It's like it subtracts. And that's all I
Okay.
wanted to point out with that, with trying to explain that it seems like
Okay.
it refers to justice in some way.
So I've got one or two things briefly to say, and then whatever you want to say, because I think we have to bring this to a close. But there's one thing that we're talking about. Okay, so we're saying or positing, and we feel comfortable to stand on the backs and shoulders of all those who came before us, because
Because they have pretty strong backs.
yeah, they have pretty strong backs. That evil is a lack of an expected good, an anticipated good. And so by me choosing to reject humility, it's starting to show us where evil is where the good is either grasped or let go of, and that's in our will, right?
Right.
So it would seem like our ability to choose or to let go of is where we make good choices or evil choices,
Right.
right?
True.
And so free will, if we do not have free will, then all our discussions on all our podcasts would just, I don't know what they would be, Z. Would it be like a computer program
Well, I don't
of
know.
just, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, we wouldn't be able to. I think that there's no coherent way to explain evil without free will.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why the reason
Go
why
ahead.
evil happens is
Mm-hmm.
because we have free will, and free
Mm-hmm.
will is good, but
Yep.
evil isn't.
And so this brings us to my last point, is that God is not the creator of evil.
Right.
Everything he created was good. And in free creatures like angels and humans, because he gave them free will, they can choose to not accept good.
Right.
And in other words, if I'm a millionaire and I need that $1 million to live, survive, feed my family, have all the operations and medical care I want, and I throw that $1 million away, that was my choice.
Mm-hmm.
God gave me the $1 million, or he gave me the way. And because free will, and that part is a little bit of a mystery, but as far as free will is an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've had a couple podcasts referring to it. But it's so evil, or the lack, is a accident, or it's not a primary cause. And good is not the primary cause of evil.
Right.
It's an accidental cause. What that means is because there's good and because there's free will, if someone chooses to reject the good, evil will exist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's all.
Absolutely.
That's basically all my closing arguments and
Yeah, I
or
don't have
points,
anything
unless you
else.
have something new. Okay. So, hey, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your time is valuable, and we think that in the future we're probably going to go into maybe natural law would be our next
I think so.
step, and then the virtues. And so we don't know how long that natural law could be, one episode, but it doesn't have to be that long. But virtues, that's another story.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we
So
may
thank you
have to
guys for
split it
watching.
up. And yeah, so thank you. Hit subscribe, like, leave a comment, send money.
Not yet.
Not money. Send, yeah, whatever. No, we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time. So, Pinchy,
Yeah, I'm waiting.
Godspeed.
Have a good week.